Hey guys, what's up? Welcome to the RotoPros pre-lock show for Monday. We've got 10 games tonight, and let's get right into it. Hey guys, what's up? Got some echoing. All right, don't need that. Okay, let's get into it. So, pitching tonight, I think it's easy to figure out who to use, but I don't really like the pitching choices. So we're kind of just going with the best of bad options, I think. Eduardo Rodriguez is definitely the best pitcher for his price. The issue with Rodriguez, I guess, is that the Royals don't strike out too much. Well, there's a couple issues. The Royals don't really strike out at all. They have the lowest strikeout rate in baseball this year. Rodriguez himself just isn't that good of a pitcher. I actually don't have his numbers in front of me, so let's get those up. But Rodriguez does have strikeout upside. That's probably the biggest positive there, aside from the easy matchup. Rodriguez has a 394 FIP, 401 xFIP this year, 397 FIP, and 426 xFIP last year. But his strikeout rates are over a K per inning both seasons. So I think Rodriguez is an average pitcher, but he has a fantasy-friendly game with the strikeout upside. So the big concerns really are the lack of strikeouts in the opposition, and then also his ownership. At lower stakes, though, I think Rodriguez will be pretty low owned. I'm a little more concerned at higher stakes. So the less money you're playing for, I think the less the field will have Rodriguez. And that's where you can get the biggest edge. I mean, it's always better in baseball, I think, and I think all of us at RotoPros are in agreement on this, that the best way to make money in DFS generally is just playing in the cheapest tournaments, because that's where the weakest fields are. That's where you're going to face the weakest competition, especially in 20 entry maximums, where sharper players, the better DFS players, can only enter 20 lineups, and then they make up less of the overall field. Like I would say tonight, Rodriguez could be 30 to 40% owned in the $1, $2, $3 tournaments, but he could be 60, 70, even more percent owned at higher stakes. So especially tonight, I think it makes sense to play in cheaper tournaments because Rodriguez is the clear value at pitcher, and the higher up you go, the more people are going to have him, and that's going to reduce your edge. So Rodriguez is a pretty easy choice. It's always worth considering the idea of stacking against the chalkiest pitcher, just because that offense is going to have no ownership. There's a ton of leverage if they do well. So if I were making a lineup in a really high stakes tournament, then maybe it would make more sense to make a Royals stack. But at lower stakes, I just don't think it's necessary. I don't think there's a lot of upside for the Royals offense. There's always some. I mean, any team can score a lot of runs on any given day, and the Red Sox do have a bad bullpen. But there are other potentially contrarian teams that I have more interest in than the Royals, and it's 10 games tonight, so ownership should be pretty spread around anyway. There's just not really a need to go contrarian just to do it with the Royals. So I don't have interest in the Royals offense. I don't think it's the worst idea, but it depends what kind of tournament and what the stakes are that you're playing in. So definitely prefer Rodriguez. He's my favorite pitcher on the slate. I think you can put him in nearly every lineup. I'll probably have him in close to every lineup, if not all. Not quite sure yet, but definitely very heavy on Erod tonight. The other pitcher that I have the most interest in is Jeff Samardzija, and I'm definitely concerned here because he's been pretty bad to start the season. He opened the year on the DL. I think it was a shoulder injury, and he's made 2 starts that weren't particularly good. He managed not to give up a run in LA against the Angels, but he had 4 strikeouts and 4 walks in that game, and his velocity was a bit down, so definitely lucky that he didn't give up any runs there. The second start was pretty bad. He got crushed by the Nationals at home in San Francisco, even though it is a pitcher's park. So for the year, Samardzija now has 7 Ks and 7 walks in 8 2/3 innings. He's given up 6 runs. It's not really a good start at all. I guess the good thing for Samardzija is that he has the easiest matchup possible. The Padres are not the worst offense in the league, but they strike out the most. And Will Myers is out of the lineup tonight. He was just placed on the DL. We don't have the full Padres lineup, but it's not very threatening. This is really going to come down to, is Samardzija close to kind of normal Jeff Samardzija, which is Still very volatile, still boom or bust, but at least there's upside there. If he's throwing slower and doesn't have his control, then there isn't very much upside, and then he's not really a good play at all. And he's not that cheap at 8,700. So I definitely like Rodriguez more than I like Samardzija. I may only actually end up with Samardzija in half my lineups or so, because Rodriguez should be a nearly all-in play. I think he's really safe. And like I said, especially at lower stakes, Samardzija is a lot less safe. So I think the route to go is maybe 90 to 100% Rodriguez, 50% Samardzija, and then kind of mix in some of these other choices. I've seen a lot of people, well, some people here too, but also on Twitter, I don't know, some Roto Grinders people talking about Tanner Roark tonight. I really don't like the play. The Pirates offense is about average. I think it's a 99 WRC plus this year against righties. Roark has pretty significant righty-lefty splits, and the Pirates do have a decent amount of left-handed batters in their lineup. So they've got, in the first 5 hitters, Frazier, Polanco, Josh Bell, and Corey Dickerson. Bell's a switch hitter. Sean Rodriguez is batting third for some reason. I don't really get that, but the rest of that top 5 is all going to be batting from the left side of the plate. They have Colin Moran hitting 7th. Starling Marte is the guy out of the lineup tonight, which does help Roark, but I think I'm more concerned about the lefties against him anyway, and he's not that cheap either. Like, I very strongly prefer Samardzija, and I think there are pitchers cheaper than Roark who maybe aren't as good, but they're close, and I think there might be more upside because they're in comparable matchups in better parks. So I'm probably off of Tanner Roark. I actually do think the Pirates make sense as a stack for leverage, because my guess would be Roark is the third, I'm going to say third highest owned pitcher on the slate. So 1 is going to be Rodriguez. I'm pretty confident there. I think number 2 will be Jake Arrieta. And then I think people will use a lot of Tanner Roark. So maybe stacking the Pirates against him is the way to go, at least in a couple lineups. I'll probably have 1 or 2 Pirates stacks in 20 lineups. But before getting into offense completely, I'll just kind of recap the pitching choices here. So it's Rodriguez number 1 for me, Samardzija number 2. I'm off Tanner Roark. And then I think I'm going to be mixing in some of these other guys. I have no interest in the top end guys like Morton, Arrieta, Zach Greinke. I think offense is easy enough to pay up for tonight that it's better to just get the savings. And I don't think any of those pitchers are good enough or in good enough matchups to use. So after Rodriguez and Samardzija, I'm kind of looking at Dan Straley, who is making his first MLB start of the season, but he did have 3 rehab appearances. Kind of hard to really use any of those numbers as anything because pitchers tend to just kind of work on stuff when they're making rehab appearances or just pitching in spring training or in the minors or whatever. But Straley clearly has strikeout upside. I think he's as good of a pitcher as Roark. They're very similar. Both get a decent amount of strikeouts. They're both a little walk prone. Straley is facing a comparable lineup in the Phillies compared to the Pirates, but the Marlins park is a much better pitcher's park, and Straley's a lot cheaper than Roark. So I'd much rather use Straley than Tanner Roark. The other cheap pitchers to consider, so I guess it'll be, let's say, just to make it simple, all-in Rodriguez, 50% Samardzija, 25% Straley. That leaves 25% left. Maybe just throw a couple darts on some of these cheaper guys who have upside. So I think Eric Lauer against the Giants, he has decent prospect status, good minor league numbers. He was awful at Coors Field, but I think he could do well against San Francisco. I think Ross Stripling at 4,000, if he has any reasonably good game, will easily hit value. Stripling, I think it's conceivable he could go 5 innings, 2 runs, some strikeouts, get like 12 to 15 fantasy points. Very cheap price. So I prefer guys like Lauer, Stripling, maybe even Jordan Zimmerman. He's pretty awful. He would definitely be my least favorite of these choices, but he is facing the Rays, and it's a pitcher's park with the wind blowing in Detroit. So Zimmerman could do well, and he has been getting a little bit more swinging strikes this season compared to last season. I don't think Zimmerman is going to be anything better than bad, but maybe he's gone from worst pitcher in baseball to simply well below average. Still a bad pitcher, but 4,400 at home against the Rays I mean, you have to be really, really awful to not be worth at least talking about at that price. And Brandon Finnegan is the last pitcher I'll mention for cheap because I do think the Brewers are going to be really, really highly owned. Probably the second highest owned offense after the Chicago Cubs. So there could be some tournament leverage on using Brandon Finnegan because so many people are going to have the Brewers. Milwaukee actually has the second lowest WRC plus against lefties last year. Too many tabs open now. Let's see if I can find it. It's notable because, yeah, it's a lefty on the mound. It's also notable that the sample size is small here because the Red Sox are dead last against lefties. So if that tells you anything, like I don't think the Red Sox are going to be a below average offense against anybody this year. So the sample is pretty small, but we do know the Brewers strike out a lot. I don't think their offense is that good. And if enough people are going to be on them, maybe you get some leverage on Finnegan. So hopefully that was clear. Again, Rodriguez, by far my favorite choice. Samardzija, distant number 2. Straley, semi-distant number 3. And then I think you could maybe take some flyers on Lauer, Zimmerman, Finnegan, and Stripling for a variety of reasons. But I'm probably going to be sticking almost entirely to those first 3, Erod, Samardzija, and Dan Straley. So let's get to offense. The obvious choice tonight, and I think a lot of people will be on it, but it's 10 games. So ownership isn't going to be too crazy here. And there's a couple other reasons why the ownership might not be too insanely high, which I'll get to. But the wind is blowing out to left center at Wrigley. It's 15 to 20 miles per hour, and we have left-handed pitchers on the mound. So not only is it a good spot for righties in this game because they're facing lefties, the wind is also blowing out more in favor of righties than left-handed hitters because it's left field, and righties generally every hitter generally hits more home runs as pulls rather than opposite field homers. So everything sets up really well for the righties in this game. The prices are reasonable. Like, this game is almost like a Coors game, not quite the same extent, but we've got an over-under of 10. I think that's fair. And the prices are, there's not a single hitter priced above 5,000 aside from Charlie Blackmon, who I think is an okay play. I'd probably just use him in team stacks, which I'll get to. But the priorities from this game, Arenado, Story, Iannetta, I think really good values there. Arenado and Story just because they have a ton of power against lefties. Iannetta more for correlation with them, but 2,900 batting 5th against the lefty with the wind blowing out. Good price on Iannetta. Then with the Cubs, we've got Almora leading off at 3,400. He's definitely my favorite value play tonight. And then Baez, Bryant, Contreras, good righties to target. Even Rizzo, just because of his price. I probably won't plug Rizzo, but if Freeland gets knocked out of the game early, then Rizzo is going to get a decent amount of at-bats against right-handed pitching. And that's just a really, really low price for Anthony Rizzo at 3,600. I'm not sure who's going to have more ownership between Ian Desmond and Albert Almora, both leading off. It should be Almora because the Cubs as a team are going to be more popular, but Desmond's going to be popular too. I don't really like Ian Desmond as a plug here, and the problem with him is that he doesn't hit the ball in the air. So last season, Desmond hit ground balls 63% of the time he put the ball in play, and he had a pretty awful season offensively overall. 69 WRC plus, and that's at Coors Field where, I mean, it accounts for the park, but he had a 345 batting average on balls in play, and Coors Field definitely boosts that a bit. This year, it looks like he's been a bit unlucky with a 212 batting average on balls in play, but he's actually hitting more grounders this season, 74% ground balls for Ian Desmond. So I think Desmond makes sense for his ability to hit singles and steal bases in front of a Rocky stack. Like, I'll definitely include him in the team stacks, but he's not benefiting from the wind like everyone else is because he doesn't hit the ball in the air. So it's 17% of the time Desmond hits a fly ball this year. His career number is 30%, so it's way down. And I'll just pull up some other Rockies for reference how often they hit fly balls. 17% is an absurdly low number. Like, I think that might be the lowest of any hitter in the league right now. So let's see. Trevor Story hits fly balls 47% of the time. It's quite a difference, almost 3 times as much. So yeah, you're not really benefiting from the wind at all if you don't hit the ball in the air. So Desmond is okay. I would include him in Rockies stacks, but the guys to really target from this game are Arenado, Story, Iannetta, and then basically everyone on the Cubs, but primarily Baez and Bryant and Wilson Contreras. So in terms of stacking, I think the Cubs are going to be the highest on offense, but I also think it's warranted. Kyle Freeland is bad, but he's especially bad against right-handed batters. So the Cubs are in a really good spot. I think just don't overthink this one too much. And again, especially at lower stakes where fields aren't as sharp. Higher stakes, Cubs could be 50% owned, but at lower stakes, probably only in the 20s. And with 10 games tonight, it's going to be pretty spread out. So definitely don't overthink this one. And I like the Cubs a lot more than I like the Brewers. The Rockies actually might be contrarian against John Lester, who has been pretty bad this year, but his ERA doesn't really bear it out. He's been a bit lucky, so having some Rocky stacks makes sense. And this is where I would include Charlie Blackmon because it's a tough matchup for him against Lester, lefty-lefty. But if Lester gets knocked out of the game early, then he may see some right-handed pitching, and then it becomes a much better spot for Blackmon. So I think the guys that I would say are game stack only on the Rockies are Desmond and Blackmon. I think some people might plug Desmond, but I'd much prefer Albert Almora. I'd much prefer some guys on the Reds, which I'll get to in a second. So this is the strongest game to target. I think most of my lineups will be these two teams. But my next favorite offense is the Cincinnati Reds, and it's kind of just for plugs. All right, we've got an update here. I'll come back to the Reds in a second. Aaron Judge is out of the lineup. Okay, this could change pitching a little bit. Let's see who we've got for the Yankees. Nick, if you're watching, is Judge getting the night off or is he injured? What's going on there? Let's see. So Austin Romine is catching. I think Sanchez is DHing. That's how they're setting it up. It definitely is a big downgrade to the Yankees offense. Judge has been their best player this year. I mean, the Yankees have a lot of good players, but Judge is one of those guys. This probably brings Charlie Morton into consideration. But, yeah, this is a tough one. I think if Morton fits, I'm okay paying up for him. Like, I definitely prefer him now to Arrieta and Greinke. It definitely makes it a lot easier to not use Arrieta and Greinke. But I still don't like Morton too much. It's just a little expensive for him, and I'd rather get the salary savings with other pitchers and pay up for offense. But I think Morton's okay. So it's kind of just, if he fits, use him. If you're making stacks of teams that aren't the Cubs and Rockies and there's just more money on the table, I think something like a Rodriguez-Morton combo makes some sense. But I still don't love Charlie Morton. I guess it puts him in play, but I probably still won't have too much of him. So back to the Reds offense. Scooter Gennett is out of the lineup tonight, which definitely hurts because Jhoulys Chacín is really awful against left-handed batters. He's got a FIP and xFIP both over 7 this year against lefties. And he's actually, his strikeout and walk rates are just a disaster against lefties. He's got 2.6 Ks per 9 and 6.1 walks per 9 against left-handed batters this year. It's only a sample of 10 innings, but in those 10 innings, he's faced 56 batters because he's just not getting anybody out. And Chacín hasn't even been that good against righties this year either. He's been kind of just league average against righties with a FIP and xFIP around 4. So Chacín's always a pretty strong splits pitcher, and I maybe won't stack the Reds too much, but if the lefties really get to him, then he could be out of the game early, and then it brings those Reds righties into play. There's more upside for them. So the Reds, I think, are a team to stack. I don't think too many people will be on them, but the priorities definitely are Jesse Winker, Joey Votto, and Scott Schebler. Schebler is going to be popular. He's more of a home run hitter. Winker, not really a home run hitter, doesn't really steal bases. He's just kind of a good overall hitter. WRC plus, I think, was around 120. and last year was kind of the same number. But Winker definitely correlates with Votto batting in front of him. If you get on base in front of Joey Votto, you're going to score plenty often. So I like that combination a little bit. But I think playing Winker, Votto, and Schebler all together makes plenty of sense. I don't have a ton of interest in Peraza. He's just not that good of a hitter. But Eugenio Suarez is a good hitter. I think he's a good play in team stacks. I think Barnhart, even like Blandino and Billy Hamilton, might have them in one lineup each because I do think it's a really strong spot for the Reds. I think they could knock Chastain out of the game pretty early, and then the righty-lefty splits just kind of go out the window there. But Winker, Votto, Schebler, I think are all really strong plugs. Kind of just put them in with the Rockies and the Cubs lineups. The Brewers, I think I'm fading for the most part. They're not much cheaper than the Wrigley game, and I think they're going to be really popular. So the one player I have a lot of interest in is Domingo Santana because of his price. But Kane and Braun are going to have a lot of ownership. I guess it's a good spot for both of them. It's kind of just if they happen to fit into the last spot of a lineup, then I'm fine with them. But I'm not going to be stacking the Brewers a little bit because of ownership. But I think the expected output is just lower than the Rockies, lower than the Reds, lower than the Cubs. The Reds are underdogs here, but it's definitely a public bias on the Brewers side. Just it's the Reds versus the Brewers, and people view the Brewers as a much better team. I'm not sure that Julius Chastain is better than Brandon Finnegan, and I'm not even sure that the Brewers lineup is better than the Reds lineup. So it's a little bit strange that the Brewers are favored here, but this is kind of just what always happens when you have just a big public divide on the favorite team. 70% of the bets right now are on Milwaukee, so just a clear public bias towards the Brewers side. I prefer the Reds side of the game, and they're my third favorite offense behind the Cubs and Rockies. So the other offenses to take flyers on, I think the Pirates is leverage against Roark. I think Arrieta will be highly owned, but there's not a lot of upside for the Marlins offense. I'm kind of just fine staying away from that game entirely. The Red Sox without Mookie Betts, I think are probably a fade against Jason Hamill. I think for them, I'd use plugs. So in the spots where you're going to pay up for a last outfielder, like I prefer Benintendi and JD Martinez to Lorenzo Cain and Ryan Braun. I think they're okay, but 4,700 for Bogarts is a lot. I won't really have Devers because I think Chris Bryant and Nolan Arenado will occupy third base in probably every single lineup. Who else do we have? So there's another game here with an over-under at 10, just like the Cubs game. The Blue Jays and Twins. And I'm not really sure why the total for this game is so high because the pitching matchup is bad, but Miguel Sano is out of the lineup. So maybe we have – well, I don't even think the umpire has been announced yet. So I don't know. It could be a hitter's umpire and just I haven't seen the update yet. But definitely two underperforming pitchers. Aaron Sanchez hasn't been that good this year. Lance Lynn has been pretty bad, especially against lefties. I think this game is it's probably worth having some exposure to because it could have as much offensive potential as the Wrigley game, just at way lower ownership. I guess the problem is that both of these games have over-unders of 10, but the way that runs are going to be scored in Chicago is going to be much more home run dependent just because of the way the weather is with the wind blowing out. Like it's a better pitching matchup there, but home runs are going to be a problem for both of them because of the wind. It could just be a lot of walks and a lot of singles in the Twins-Blue Jays game. So I think plugs are fine here. I think you can stack it. It should be pretty low ownership game, but I just don't have a ton of interest. The Twins lineup is kind of tough with Sano out. I'm just looking for value plays here potentially. It's also kind of tough when you have Logan Morrison, Joe Mauer playing the same position. Kendrys Morales, Justin Smoke, both at first base, same position, same problem. But Smoke's cheap at 3,500. I think he's a good play. I think Granderson's a good play. I think Teoscar Hernandez is just a really good hitter. He's probably a decent play. Eddie Rosario, 3,600, batting third. And Eduardo Escobar, both of those guys have just been a little bit underpriced. And Max Kepler, too, I think is decent. But we've got a lot of outfielders kind of just in the same price range that are all worth looking at. So it's going to be kind of hard to have too much of any of these guys. I definitely prefer Almora as a value play. I prefer Jesse Winker, Scott Schebler, paying up Red Sox guys. So this game could get lost by most people, but I think it's a tough game to really use for me too. But maybe if you have 20 lineups, maybe it's worth making a stack each of these two teams because the pitching matchup just isn't great, and there is some potential for offense here. All right, so we've got a couple more games to touch on. I think there could be some interest in the Tigers-Rays game, but Detroit is a pitcher's park. The wind is blowing in, and Miguel Cabrera is out of the lineup. Wilson Ramos is out of the lineup for the Rays. It kind of just hurts everyone to not – like those probably are the two best hitters on either team. I think Miggy for sure is the Tigers' best hitter. Maybe Nick Castellanos, but he's up there. Wilson Ramos might actually be the Rays' best hitter. It's probably either him or Brad Miller. So injuries kind of have me off these two teams. There are better situations, better parks. Even with bad starting pitchers, especially Jordan Zimmerman, I still don't really have interest in this game. And we've got the same issue with the positions for the Rays where Cron and Miller both play first, Wendell's second, Robertson second and third, but then we have Duffy at third. Everyone's just kind of playing in the same spot. And yeah, I think this game is just a fade completely. So the last two games, well, I'll just say fading the Padres and Giants, strong pitchers park in San Francisco. I think Eric Lauer is probably a little underrated. And if you're going to have 50% Samardzija, you probably don't want to have too much of the Padres. But even if Samardzija pitches poorly, I don't think there's a ton of upside for San Diego playing at AT&T. All right. So the Yankee game. Aaron Judge is out. Probably, well, I don't think people are going to use the Yankees, but Charlie Morton's a good pitcher. The Astros have a good bullpen. The Yankees are expensive. So Gary Sanchez is going to be a lot lower owned than Wilson Contreras, but I still probably won't have more than like a flyer or two on him. I think Contreras just has more expected output in a better spot with the wind blowing out. So the Yankees could be worth considering at higher stakes where you really need to be contrarian, but lower stakes tournament, I think the Yankees actually could have more ownership there because you get a lot of public bias on the Yankees just from kind of like new DFS players who are just Yankee fans and just pick them for fun. So I don't have any interest in the Yankees tonight. I think Sonny Gray has been bad enough this year that the Astros are worth a look for a contrarian stack. One of the issues with stacking against the Yankees is their bullpen is really good. I also think Sonny Gray has been dramatically underachieving. The Yankees have him throwing way more off-speed pitches this year, and it hasn't worked. I think sooner rather than later, they're going to kind of just let him go back to throwing more fastballs, and the results should go back to kind of what he was the last couple of years where he's better. Not an ace or anything, but he should be a mid-rotation starter going forward. And I think that could start as early as tonight. The sharp money for this game is notable too. The over-under opened at 9, and it's almost all the way down to 8. And that actually happened before there was any indication that Aaron Judge wouldn't be playing. So I think Houston is a pitcher's park, and both these pitchers are probably good. I mean, we know Charlie Morton's good, but I think Sonny Gray is probably above average also. And this should be a lower scoring game than people realize. Two good bullpens. I think it's just a complete fade. Like for ownership, I think I'd rather stack the Rockies. They may have a little more ownership than the Astros, but the Reds should be in the same ownership neighborhood as the Astros. I think the Blue Jays and Twins kind of will be low like them also. So it seems like a little bit of a reach to use the Astros. And if I'm paying up for anyone, it's going to be the Cubs and Rockies guys, maybe even some Red Sox guys. So I know Greg and I mentioned the Astros as a contrarian stack on the podcast last night. I'm not really going that route. I don't think I'm going to have much of any, probably zero Astros exposure. So that's going to just about wrap it up. For those of you watching, let me know as always if you have any questions. But I think that's about it. Scanning for potential plugs, but I think with cheaper pitching choices, there's just not a need to find cheap value plays offensively. I think it's going to be a pretty narrow focus for me on offense. Cubs, Rockies, a good amount of Reds, and then a pitcher a little more spread around with Rodriguez, and then kind of a mix of Samardzija, some Charlie Morton, some Dan Straley. I think with Morton back in play, I'm not going to go all the way down to guys like Zimmerman and Eric Lauer and Ross Stripling. I think the pitching core is now going to be probably 4 guys with Rodriguez, Samardzija, Morton, and Straley. So, all right, no more questions. So that's going to do it. Thanks for watching, everyone. Back same time tomorrow, and see you then.